a country nearly inaccessible to Americans, even American journalists, for more than 5 decades. Hello, South Florida. I'm Hatsavella, and this is Cuba. During the next 2 hours, we'll take you coast to coast, where few television cameras have gone before. It took us about 2 miles to get through this wooded area.
This is what Santiago de Cuba looks like on a Monday night.
Just 90 miles south of Key West, but worlds apart. Local 10 is the one and only station given access to the communist island, to bring you an inside view of life. We went wherever we wanted to go across the island, every province from north, south, east, and west. We explored Cuba and wanted to share those stories with you. It's Cuba like you've never seen before. Our journey begins in Havana. We've taken you to the capital city several times. This time, we wanted to venture out to see the rest of the island. We rent the van that would take us across the country on a historic trip. We meet up with Felipe, our Cuban guide, and the uncle of our producer, Michelle Lackamore. With critical planning and a limited amount of time, we head out on our coast-to-coast journey. Our special begins in Guantanamo. You may have heard the song. Well, this is the city, the town that inspired it. Like many Cuban towns, its central square attracts residents day and night. In Guantanamo, we didn't have to look for it. Frustration found us. These are the outskirts of Guantanamo.
Esta es la calle Varona.
Varona Street, neighbors say. Here, you won't see pretty colonial buildings.
Esto aquí es un brazo de mar.
These women complain about how badly it floods here. No money in the town's budget right now to fix it, she says.
Este es un tragante que la tapa se le partió.
Another woman wants us to see a sewer pipe with a broken cover. The neighbors had to resolver, as they say, and cover it with this old rusted metal sheet.
Cuando llueve es un río que nadie puede salir.
When it rains, it's like a river out here, she says. No one can leave their homes. Meanwhile, down the street, this man says he earns some cash fixing shoes. But today, the workload wasn't good. Just 2 pairs. At night, in Guantanamo's main drag, where you find lots of stores, you will also find this man. At first, you think he's just taking a break, but get closer and you'll see why he's there. He sells bags, plastic bags that you and I toss out after going to the grocery store. He relies on to make a few extra bucks. The city of Guantanamo does have tourist attractions, but typically it's overshadowed by our U.S. naval base. It's a weekday afternoon, and after driving for about 30 minutes, we go up a steep road to get to this lookout to see the famous base. But you can barely see it. Folks here in Guantanamo say this is the only spot where they can see our naval base, a point of contention for both countries for many years. For you history buffs, the history of the base goes back to the Spanish-American War, the late 1800s, when Cuba belongs to Spain. The war ends. Spain gives the U.S. control of Cuba. Cuba then becomes independent. But there's a catch. The Cubans agreed to lease the Bay of Guantanamo territory for a little more than $3,300. Now, the price is about $4 grand. For more than 50 years, Fidel Castro has refused to cash those checks. The Castros argue the territory is illegally occupied, that the young Caribbean nation then didn't have much leverage and felt obligated to lease the land. Rafael Velázquez was born and raised in a tiny town near the base called Mártires de las Fronteras. martyrs from the border.
Roce como tal no tenemos con ellos.
There's very little interaction, he says, between Cubans and Americans, but you cannot get too close. Some of the land, he says, has mines.
Es un territorio cubano.
It's Cuban land, he says, with lots of parks and beaches, lots of pretty things on that side. He hopes the land can eventually be given back to Cuba. Back in Guantanamo's Central Square, we see something we did not expect to see. It catches us off guard. With a cell phone camera, our producer captures this. A man carrying a small homemade sign screaming, "Cuban people, wake up." He goes on to say, the people are being lied to. And demands the government increase wages and drop prices at supermarkets. We keep rolling when this happens. A park caretaker hoses down the man, telling him to get a job. People in town told us he does this time and time again, and each time he's taken away and jailed before being released days later. This is the reality in Guantanamo, a reality that lonely protester alluded to before he was hosed down and taken away. Our next stop, the province of Santiago de Cuba. The city of Santiago is known for many things.
Rico, bueno.
The birthplace of rum. The birthplace of trova, a world-renowned style of Cuban music.
This is what Santiago de Cuba looks like on a Monday night. Believe it or not, this happens every night, Monday through Friday.
Dancing and music is a way of life here in Santiago, really in Cuba.
Es un lugar donde se baila la música cubana tradicional.
Traditional Cuban music, and the dancing doesn't stay too far behind. Santiagueros, as they're called, were getting ready for Carnaval. At night, on the streets, you see how they get ready. 3 months of practice every night.
Es lo máximo, es la vida entera para el santiaguero.
Probably the best time of the year for folks who live here, says Gabriel Lopez, who is the group's choreographer.
Viene desde nuestros ancestros y lo hemos ido cultivando y defendiendo.
It's something that dates back to our ancestors, and we have cultivated and defended this tradition, says Sonilda Nelson, the mother of one of the dancers.
Es un momento de júbilo, de participación, donde todos estamos en familia.
It's a couple days of joy where we all participate, she says, and surround ourselves with family. It's a time when other Santiagueros, natives of this province, come back home.
Nuestros hijos y nuestra generación mantengan esta raíz y esta cubanía.
These folks want to make sure their children hold on to these roots, what they call their cubanía.
Lleva mucho tiempo, pero mucho sacrificio.
This 20-year-old dancer named Leonard says it takes a lot of time and sacrifice, but in the end, it's worth it. Practice ends for the night. But there's another side to Santiago's history. It is the birthplace of the country's revolution. It was here at the Cuartel Moncada, an army barracks back then, where the Castros launched an attack in 1953. The first failed attempt to topple dictator Fulgencio Batista. It was in Santiago, 6 years later, where Fidel, from this balcony, declared victory in 1959 and told his people he was not personally interested in power. 5 decades later, the Castros are still in power. And there are reminders that Santiago was a crucial battleground in Cuba's modern history. A stop for every papal visit since 1998.
It was from this cathedral that Pope Francis greeted and blessed the people of Santiago during his visit.
said to be the largest city in Cuba.
Este es Santiago de Cuba, sí.
Santiago is hilly. So hilly. The famous Padre Pico stairs are there not just for tourist pictures, but really to help the people get to the top of the hills. Truth is, just like Revolution, Cubans here, or Santiagueros as they're called, remember a more recent calamity. Walk around, ask, and you'll quickly get stories, complete with dates. October 25th, 2012. Hurricane Sandy makes landfall in Santiago.
Fue una cosa desastrosa. Santiago fue devastado completamente.
Imares Rosales says it was disastrous. The town was completely devastated. Sandy came overnight. It lasted for hours. Debris on every block. Light posts collapsed. Trees down.
Es como si hubiéramos tenido una guerra de 3 horas.
It felt like we had been attacked in a 3-hour war. 11 people died. They remember a good amount of homes lost their roofs. 3 years later, and residents say recovery has been astonishing.
Se sorprende ver cómo Santiago se ha recuperado tan rápido.
Those who visit are surprised to see how fast we have recovered, she says.
Todavía nos queda mucho por hacer, pero tenemos que reconocerlo, que el cambio ha sido muy bueno.
Still a long ways to go, she says, but we have to recognize recovery has been positive. Yet another instance that Santiago is on center stage of Cuban history, likely not the last time for the old port town. Coming up, a visit to the town and shrine of Cuba's patron saint. Then, to the province of Granma and a look at the ways people use an old pastime to make a few bucks. And later, a story all too familiar in the exile community, a family separated for more than 45 years.